Let's continue with part 3 of chapter 13. MacGuffin, Sunny said, which meant, your scheming means nothing in this place. Count Olaf raised the seashell to his lips, and the Baudelaires could see that he was trembling. Then maybe I'll just stay here, he said hoarsely. I've lost too much to go on. My parents, my true love, my henchfolk, an enormous amount of money I didn't earn, even the boat with my name on it. The three children looked at one another, remembering their time on that boat and recalling that they had considered throwing him overboard. If Olaf had drowned in the sea, the Medusite mycelium might never have threatened the island, although the deadly fungus eventually would have washed up on its shores. And if the villain were dead, then there would be no one on the beach who might help Kit Snicket and her child. Violet knelt on the sand and grabbed the villain's shoulders with both hands. We have to go on, she said. Do one good thing in your life, Olaf. I've done lots of good things in my life, he snarled. I once took in 3 orphans. Klaus knelt down beside his sister and stared into the villain's shiny eyes. You're the one who made us orphans in the first place, he said, uttering out loud for the first time a secret all the Baudelaires had kept in their hearts for almost as long as they could remember. Olaf closed his eyes for a moment, grimacing in pain, and then stared slowly at each of the 3 children in turn. Is that what you think? He said finally. We know it, Sunny said. You don't know anything, Count Olaf said. You 3 children are the same as when I first laid eyes on you. You think you can triumph in a world with nothing more than a keen mind, a pile of books, and the occasional gourmet meal. He poured one last gulp of cordial into his poisoned mouth before throwing the seashell into the sand. You're just like your parents, he said, and from the shore the children heard Kit Snicket moan. You have to help Kit, Violet said. The baby is arriving. Kit, Count Olaf asked, and in one swift gesture he grabbed an apple from the stock pot and took a savage bite. He chewed, wincing in pain, and the Baudelaires listened as the wheezing settled and the poisonous fungus was diluted by their parents' invention. He took another bite and then, with a horrible groan, the villain rose to his feet, and the children saw that his chest was soaked with blood. You're hurt, Klaus said. I've been hurt before, Count Olaf said, and he staggered down the slope and waded into the water of the floating coastal shelf. In one smooth gesture, he lifted Kit from the raft and carried her onto the shore of the island. The distraught woman's eyes were closed, and as the Baudelaires hurried down to her, they were not sure she was alive until Olaf laid her carefully down on the white sands of the beach, and the children saw her chest heaving with breath. The villain stared at Kit for one long moment, and then he leaned down and did a strange thing. As the Baudelaire orphans looked on, Count Olaf gave Kit Snicket a gentle kiss on her trembling mouth. Yuck, Sunny said, as Kit's eyes fluttered open. I told you, Count Olaf said weakly. I told you I'd do one last time. You're a wicked man, Kit said. Do you think one kind act will make me forgive you for your failings? The villain stumbled a few steps away and then sat down on the sand and uttered a deep sigh. I haven't apologized, he said, looking first at the pregnant woman and then at the Baudelaires. Kit reached out and touched the man's ankle, right on the tattoo of an eye that had haunted the children since they had first seen it. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked at the tattoo, remembering all of the times it had been disguised and all of the times it had been revealed, and they thought of all the other places they had seen it. For if you looked carefully, the drawing of an eye also spelled out the initials VFD, and the children had investigated the volunteer fire department, first trying to decode the organization's sinister mysteries, and then trying to participate in its noble errands. It seemed that these eyes were watching them through whether the eyes were noble or treacherous, good or evil, seemed even now to be a mystery. The whole story of these eyes, it seemed, might always be hidden from the children, kept in darkness, along with all the other eyes watching all the other orphans every day and every night. The night has 1,000 eyes, Kit said hoarsely, and lifted her head to face the villain. The Baudelaires could tell by her voice that she was reciting the words of someone else. And the day but one, yet the light of the bright world dies with the dying sun. The mind has 1,000 eyes, and the heart but one. Yet the light of a whole life dies when love is done. Count Olaf gave Kit a faint smile. You're not the only one who can recite the words of our associates, he said, and then gazed out at the sea. The afternoon was nearly over, and soon the island would be covered in darkness. Man, hands on misery to man, the villain said. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can. Here, he coughed, a ghastly sound, and his hands clutched his chest. And don't have any kids yourself, he finished, and uttered a short, sharp breath. Then the villain's story came to an end. Olaf lay back on the sand, far from the treachery of the world, and the children stood on the beach and stared into his face. His eyes shone brightly, and his mouth opened as if he wanted to tell them something, but the Baudelaire orphans never heard Count Olaf say another word. Kit gave a cry of pain, thick with poisonous fungus, and clutched her heaving belly, and the Baudelaires hurried to help her. They did not even notice when Count Olaf closed his eyes for the last time. And perhaps this is a good time for you to close your eyes too, not just to avoid reading the end of the Baudelaire story, but to imagine the beginning of another. It is likely your own eyes were closed when you were born, so that you left this place of your mother's womb, the place of your mother's womb, or if you are a seahorse, your father's yoke sack, and joined the treachery of the world without seeing exactly where you were going. You did not yet know the people who were helping you make your way here, or the people who would shelter you as your life began, when you were even smaller and more delicate and demanding than you are now. It seems strange that you would do such a thing and leave yourself in the care of strangers for so long, only gradually opening your eyes to see what all the fuss was about. And yet this is the way nearly everyone comes into the world. Perhaps if we saw what was ahead of us and glimpsed the crimes, follies, and misfortunes that would befall us later on, we would all stay in our mother's womb, and then there would be nobody in the world but a great number of very fat, very irritated women. In any case, this is how all of our stories begin, in darkness, with our eyes closed. And all of our stories end the same way too, with all of us uttering some last words, or perhaps someone else's, before slipping back into darkness as our series of unfortunate events comes to an end. And in this way, with the journey taken by Kit Snicket's baby, we reach the end of a series of unfortunate events as well. For some time, Kit Snicket's labor was very difficult, and it seemed to the children that things were moving in an aberrant, the word aberrant here means very, very wrong, and causing much grief direction. But finally into the world came a baby girl, just as I'm very, very sorry to say her mother and my sister slipped away from the world after a long night of suffering. But also a night of joy, as the birth of a baby is always good news, no matter how much bad news the baby will hear later. The sun rose over the coastal shelf, which would not flood again for another year, and the Baudelaire orphans held the baby on the shore and watched as her eyes opened for the first time. Kit Snicket's daughter squinted at the sunrise and tried to imagine where in the world she was. And of course, as she wondered this, she began to cry. The girl, named after the Baudelaire's mother, howled and howled, and as her series of unfortunate events began, this history of the Baudelaire orphans ended. This is not to say, of course, that the Baudelaire orphans died that day. They were far too busy. Although they were still children, the Baudelaires were parents now, and there was quite a lot to do. Violet designed and built the equipment necessary for raising an infant, using the library of detritus, stored in the shade of the apple tree. Klaus searched the enormous bookcase for information on childcare and kept careful track of the baby's progress. Sunny herded and milked the wild sheep to provide nourishment for the baby, and used the whisk Friday had given her to make soft foods as the baby's teeth came in. And all three Baudelaires planted seeds from the bitter apples all over the island to chase away any traces of the medusoid mycelium, even though they remembered it grew best in small enclosed spaces, so the deadly fungus had no chance to harm the child, and so the island would remain as safe as it was on the day they arrived. These chores took all day and all night while the baby was learning to sleep. The Baudelaires would sit together in the large reading chairs and take turns reading out loud from the book their parents had left behind. And sometimes they would flip to the back of the book and add a few lines to the history themselves. While reading and writing, the siblings found many answers for which they had been looking, although each answer, of course, only brought forth another mystery. As there were many details of the Baudelaire's lives that seemed like a strange, unreadable shape of some great unknown. But this did not concern them as much as you might think. One cannot spend forever sitting and solving the mysteries of one's history, and no matter how much one reads, the whole story can never be told. But it was enough. Reading their parents' words was, under the circumstances, the best for which the Baudelaire orphans could hope. As the night grew later, they would drop off to sleep, just as their parents did in the chairs in the secret space beneath the roots of the bitter apple tree. In the arboretum, on an island far, far from the treachery of the world, several hours later, of course, the baby would wake up and fill the space with confused and hungry cries. The Baudelaires took turns, and while the other two children slept, one Baudelaire would carry the baby in a sling Violet had designed out of the arboretum and up to the top of the brae, where they would sit, infant and parent, and have breakfast while staring at the sea. Sometimes they would visit Kit Snicket's grave, where they would lay a few wildflowers, or the grave of Count Olaf, where they would merely stand silent for a few moments. In many ways, the lives of the Baudelaire orphans that year is not unlike my own. Now that I have concluded my investigation, like Violet, like Klaus, and like Sunny, I visit certain graves and often spend my mornings standing on a brae, staring out at the same sea. It is not the whole story, of course, but it is enough. Under the circumstances, it is the best for which you can hope. Oh my goodness. And that is the end of chapter 13. Luckily, we have chapter 14 to look forward to, and hopefully there's a little more resolve, but I wouldn't count on it. This is, of course, a series of unfortunate events, so I don't know that they're going to leave us with a happy ending any more than they already have, because I can live with this. I can live with this ending. All right, on to chapter 14 very soon.